In the latter half of 2019, it seemed as if the hockey world had shifted its attention to behind the bench, meaning that a lot of news and headlines in general at the time were having to do with NHL head coaches being in hot water for not so good reasons. In this video, we're going to turn back time and go over how toxic coaching once dominated the NHL. We'll cover how different aspects of the job have changed for the better and the outlook for the position in the future. And with that, here's how toxic coaching once dominated the NHL. Around 20 years ago, things in the NHL were much different. It was towards the end of the era that valued toughness and grit over skill. Players such as George Laraque, Derek Boogaard, and Sean Avery were able to make millions as enforcers for their team. It wasn't uncommon to have multiple players to reach the 200 penalty minute threshold in the 2000s. And therefore, as I alluded to, skill wasn't as favored over physicality as it is today. Scoring was much lower, and play was generally just slower all around. The trap style that the New Jersey Devils coined made it almost painful at times to follow. As research began to shed light on issues such as CTE, the shift towards a faster, more skilled game began to happen. Anyways, aside from the on-ice happenings being vastly different to those we know today, coaching tactics were pretty different as well. Mind games that involved mostly verbal and mental abuse were much more common at that time. Coaches such as Mike Babcock and Mike Keenan used the power dynamic to their advantage by intimidating players and causing disastrous outcomes. Mike Keenan grabbed me by the throat once on the bench, Jeremy Roenick recalled years after the fact. Brett Hull, who had his fair share of run-ins with Keenan, recalls his pleas with Wayne Gretzky not to come to St. Louis while on the podcast Cam and Strick.
Just think about it. You make a trade for the greatest player in the history of the world, and you treat him so badly he doesn't re-sign with you.
Why didn't he re-sign?
When one of his best players on the team with him, one of his best friends is on the team with him.
Why didn't he re-sign with the Blues? What's the real story?
Because they treated him, Jack Quinn and Mike Keenan treated him so poorly. He said this, because I told him, I said, don't do this. I go, this guy is crazy, Gretz. You don't want to play for him. And he goes, oh, he'll change when I get there. I go, no, he won't. He doesn't have any respect for anybody that's a player. And he goes, no, he'll change when I get there. I go, I'm just going to give you one more chance to not do this. I'm sure there's 10 more teams lined up to trade for you.
Really?
That you'll enjoy. And after about a week, he looked at me and said, I should have listened to you.
While Keenan played mind games for sure, the king of psychological manipulation was definitely Mike Babcock. Beginning in the early 2000s, Babcock's reign of terror affected so many players that went on until last year, if we count his stint with Columbus. I'm going to try and summarize here for the sake of time, but if you'd like to learn even more about Babcock's past atrocities, be sure to check out my previous video that I did covering all things Babcock. But even before Babcock reached the NHL level, he was already butting heads with players in the AHL. According to Mike Commodore, who appeared on the hockey podcast Spittin' Chicklets, Babcock, who he refers to as Babs the Bully, held him back on purpose. While both player and coach were representing the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks, Commodore claims that the head coach refused to play him in favor of someone else. Years later, after he had signed a deal with the Red Wings, Commodore was yet again sidelined for all but 2 games throughout the first 3 months of the season. After former GM Ken Holland figured things out, he gave him, according to Commodore, a pity move by trading him to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Unfortunately for Babcock, the list of players that have spoken of the mistreatment from the bench boss have been lengthy. Johan Franzen called him a, quote, terrible man and said that he was the worst person that he had ever met. This was due to the verbal abuse that Franzen had suffered during his tenure with Detroit. Chris Chelios also corroborated this on Spittin' Chicklets as well. Besides just the verbal abuse side of it, just like Commodore claimed, Babcock was oddly fond of sadistically robbing his players of precious and sentimental moments. From Mike Modano getting scratched for what would have been his 1500th game, to benching Chris Chelios for the Winter Classic that was against his hometown team. There's several instances besides these that I could name, but by now you get the gist. Shockingly though, coaches that displayed this toxic behavior decades ago were the prototypes that won Stanley Cups. Mike Keenan captured a Stanley Cup with the New York Rangers in 1994, and Babcock in 2008 with Detroit. However, as the 2010s decade was about to conclude, something happened that was a major catalyst for change. Once hockey season starts, that means that the holidays are just around the corner. And there's no better way to stay hydrated and to avoid a nasty hangover than drinking Liquid IV. With fresh flavors such as cotton candy, rainbow sherbet, and more, Liquid IV has many different products and varieties on hand. Not only does it have 3 times the electrolytes than the leading sports drink, but it also hydrates you faster than water. So whether you're planning to have some drinks over the holidays or just looking for gift ideas, you can support me by using my promo code AlyssaHope in all caps. This will give you 20% off your entire order plus free shipping. My link will be down below, or you can just fire up the website and plug in my code from there. And now, back to the video. November of 2019, headlines from all around the league began to release some troubling information about Toronto's head coach at the time, Mike Babcock. Babcock, who was the highest paid coach in the league at the time, reportedly brought 19-year-old Mitch Marner to tears by making him do a sadistically pointless exercise. While the Leafs were on a father-son trip, Babcock took it upon himself to target one of the most vulnerable players on the team by first questioning Marner's work ethic. Babcock's answer to remedy Marner's perceived laziness was to have him rank each of his teammates by their work ethic. It wasn't long after that Marner was forced to see their reactions as his list was read out loud. Babcock was fired by the team on the 20th of November, and it was almost like at this point in time that the power seemed to shift a little more back to the players, as Akeem Alou was the next to voice his truth about his former coach Bill Peters spewing racial slurs at him and criticizing the type of music he preferred. Again, I've gone more into length about the story as well in another video, but the pendulum continued to swing at this point, as Peters was fired and blacklisted at the NHL level. And just like that, story after story began to pour in. It became more normalized for players to feel comfortable and compelled to speak out about ill treatment. This not only stemmed from coaching, but also from a strict hierarchy that was in each locker room. If you all would enjoy a deep dive into that topic of locker room hazing, definitely let me know in the comments. While I personally can't imagine the level of courage that Kyle Beach had when he spoke out about the terrible treatment he suffered at the hands of former video coach Brad Aldridge, I can say that Marner, Alou, and others made it a tad bit easier by paving the way. For those that don't know, Kyle Beach was basically a black ace that was along for the ride during Chicago's 2010 Stanley Cup run. And it was during that time period that Aldridge used the power dynamic to his advantage and intimidated the young player. After suffering at the hands of a person that was supposed to provide guidance and direction, Beach found the courage to be the whistleblower and to speak up for himself and other victims that couldn't. The whole incident, as catastrophic as it was, gained an even more sinister tone once it was realized that many within the walls of the Hawks locker room knew what was going on. After a thorough investigation, several members of management were sent on their way, including former GM Stan Bowman and former coach Joel Quenneville. It was then that the hockey world was officially brought to its knees, and reality set in that things such as these can happen. Thankfully though, things between November 2019 and July of 2023 had shifted to where Babcock was immediately sent on his way following an incident with a young unnamed player. According to Paul Bissonnette from Spit and Chicklets, there was a player who gave him inside information on Babcock that he was making him feel uncomfortable due to actions that were made outside of team facilities. Those actions in question, demanding to see pictures on the player's phone and scrolling through them without specific consent. This time, after seeing the first glimpse of questionable antics, former GM Jarmo Kekalainen gave the head coach the opportunity to resign from his position. While we have most certainly seen the end of Babcock's NHL tenure, it's possible that Joel Quenneville could resume coaching if a team decides to hire him, considering that he's been officially cleared by Commissioner Gary Bettman. In all honesty, it really seems that players are now just not taking abusive behavior from coaches and now feel that they have a voice for themselves. No longer is it in the culture to just put your head down and take it when the antics are crossing a humane line. Coaching tactics today have shifted to largely taking into account the cultural changes that I spoke of in this video. One coach that has adapted well, considering his personality and his past, is John Tortorella. While obviously I can't speak directly on how he treats his current players, it really seems like from a spectator's position that they respect him. While he seems brash on the surface, he has this demeanor about him that makes his players play hard. And how he's welcomed Johnny Gaudreau's father to team practices in Philly just speaks to his character. Torts is a fine example of how changing with the times is possible. In conclusion, again, if you enjoyed this video and would like for me to do a similar one about the hazing culture shifting for the better as well, be sure to let me know down in the comments. If this is your first time tuning into my channel, I'd love it if you could subscribe and give this channel a chance. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.